This time on Backshed, we're taking the XY to the 8th mile. So a mate rings me, hey, I'm going to the 8th mile. Well, me too then. But the car we've most got suited to drag racing is probably the big block EH, but it's got a motor out of it at the minute, and the one I want to get down the 8th mile is Mucus, but we're still waiting on a 9-inch diff. So we're going to improvise and take the XY. There is a couple of little things I want to do to the XY first. It has a 3.25 to 1 ratio open centre diff in it, and that really isn't going to work on an 8th mile. Technically an open centre will only spin one wheel. This engine overpowers it and makes it spin 2 wheels, but it goes left hard. And we're probably going to have to pinch some wheels off Mucus. He's got some drag radials, they're multi-fits. These are only street tyres on the back of the XY, so we might swap them as well. If you haven't seen the XY before, in episode 5 we pulled the 351 out, we put the 410 stroker in it, and that 351's coming back in the new car coming up shortly. And then again in episode 10 we did a bit more in depth into this motor and a few other bits and pieces. But for now, let's get on the hoist, get the wheels off, axles out, diff centre out. Stop talking, get into it. Wheels off, and this guy's a disc brake rear end. Now with the drum brake rear end, you get to this point, it's just the drum comes off and there'll be a hole in the axle like that, and you'll be able to see in there flange bolts. So with the drum off, you just undo that bolt, rotate it around. So this guy being disc, it doesn't make it any harder, it just more shit you got to undo. This caliper has to come off. I'm not going to disconnect the brakes and take the caliper right off. We're just going to undo the back of the caliper. And I've been driving this a fair bit, so try to ignore the filth here, but undo the caliper there, and that caliper is going to swing away. I'll probably have to disconnect the handbrake though. So we'll get that caliper off, we'll zip tie it out of the way, and then we'll start undoing the axles through that flange bolt. Caliper's now unbolted, and I've just moved it to the side and zip tied him so he doesn't go that way. You don't want to hang pressure off these lines. I know that's got a spring around it, but try not to hang pressure off these lines. Now we go this way, in through the hole of the axle. There's the bolt you need to undo. Then you rotate it around, undo that guy, rotate it around, undo that guy. So you've got a car, right, and you want to know what sort of center's in it, but you don't want to pull it apart. This is one way you can check. If you've got a car and you're not sure what's actually in it, one way to identify whether you've got an open center or limited slip or locker is, and I'll just put a wheel back on that other side. Alright, so you see that tyre there? So if you rotate this side one way, the other side will turn the opposite way if you're watching. See how that one's rotating forward, but I'm rotating this one backwards. There's side gears or sun gears or spider gears, a million names for it, but that actually allows the wheels to turn at different paces. But when the tail shaft is not turning and you spin it, they will turn opposite ways. We'll have a look under the back of Mucus because I've pulled the backing plate off. You'll see there's a side gear here attached to the axle, a side gear here attached to the axle, and then a top and a bottom gear. So if I turn the left hand wheel backwards, you'll see this gear here, and I'll hold the pinion so it can't turn. You see it's transferring
that rotation into the top gear, into this right hand side gear, and that's why they turn opposite directions.
So why did I show you under mucus and his diff rather than just the 9-inch centre that I pulled out? I'll show you. Because with a 9-inch hemisphere, you can't see anything. The only hole all the way around is just there, so you can't see the side gears at all. So the 10-bolt Salisbury and mucus is just easy because all this is open. You can actually see what you're talking about. But that'll at least tell you 100% that it's not a locker or LSD. If it spins opposite ways, she's open. So righto, we'll stop talking. I'll start knocking these flange bolts out. So all the flanges are undone, so the axle can come out. But I'll show you where anxiety lives for me in this car. Not there, it's the other side. I thought it was this side. Although this one's not great, if you see the scoring there? So that's actually a positive. I thought that was the bad one. We'll go around here. It's not great, but race day tomorrow. So I'll see if I can give you a better look at this now. If you see the splines come up, then they rotate and then they finish. I'll see if you can look down along it. They're not great, but to give you an idea how they get like that, back in the day I had a habit of putting the car in reverse with a top loader in it, reversing as fast as you could, pulling it in second and dumping the clutch. That's the result of what's called a rollback. And the left one, he's not quite so bad. You can just see right at the end there he's twisted, but as I say, race day tomorrow, got no option, they're going back in. Okay, once the axle's out, next job is number 1, undo that tail shaft, and then 2, those bolts around there. Knock them out and pull the hemisphere out. So we'll get into that. A little bit of an oil leak there too. That pinion seal looks like he's failing, or the carrier seal. Oh well, it's going to come out. So all these nuts are off now, right the way around. I'm going to leave that one in, undone right to the tip of the thread, but I'm going to leave the nut on it because I'm going to pry the bottom here to let the oil drain off, but that nut is going to stop it just in case it has a bit of a gravity attack and wants to, I don't know, fall. So that'll just keep the center in. I'll just crack that. So that oil's pretty clean because we've not long changed that. Well, it was a while ago, but it hasn't done many Ks. However, I'm catching it, but I'm not going to keep it and try and reuse it because that's an open center, standard diff and gear oil. Limited slips use a different gear oil. So that's the 3.25 center out, and that's the 4.11 ready to go in. Clean up all that gasket off there and chuck him in. Now, I've wire wheeled both surfaces, cleaned it with thinners. So if you are buying second hand stuff, just remember there is a couple of different splines with both manufacturers. There's some coarse spline, fine spline in the GM stuff, and then with the 9 inches there's obviously 28, 31 and up for the high performance stuff. So just make sure you're buying the right shit. Count the splines. I don't have a gasket, so because this crept up on me, we only found out the roads were open from flooding and we're going to actually be able to race yesterday. So I'm just using a Loctite Ultra Blue. I just put a bead around it, bung it in, and get it done. So some of these can be a little bit tight going in. I guess mass-produced centre, the studs can be slightly off. That one was quite hard. I had to lever it to come out, and this one I've sort of had to give it a tap with a mallet to go back in. Try to refrain bashing with a hammer, because if you're going crooked, you'll take the edge off a thread. It's not great. And the same thing goes with, so that's not quite hitting the face there, that's just off the face. Don't pull it in with one. Go in a little bit, top and bottom, side to side, and just work it in, because if you just start tightening up here and go around to here, by the time you get to here, it'll be bound up on the thread so hard on that side, and on an angle, it'll tear the thread. And that's when you start renaming yourself a name that couldn't be called out at roll call at school, for instance. Center's back in, but I'm looking at that now going, I'll tell you something I didn't check. I didn't check that yoke was the same uni, but with the splines I checked, because you can't change them. But that yoke, if it's too narrow or whichever, and there is different lengths as well. That looks the same length. I'm just worried about that width of that uni. But you can undo them there and swap that guy onto that diff. But anyway, axle's back in. Let's start buttoning him up. Two ways you can put oil in it. Through the axle tube before you put the axle in, but you just got to crack the fill nut because that's the level it wants. I don't care how you do it, from the center, from the axle tubes, just don't forget to do it. The axle's back in. I've borrowed Mucus's wheels because he's got the old drag radials. They're not great, but they'll do. But I had a hell of a time getting them on, and I'll show you why. That's the Ford stud pattern. They weren't hard to go on Mucus because we used the GM or the Chevy pattern, and you can see it hasn't had a lug in there. See how they're crushed? Well, all the edge of that hole is sort of squashed, and somebody's done them up so tight. I would say they changed their underwear after they did it. So what I actually had to do was get a little stone and just clean up around the edge of the hole there, take all the burrs off, because I couldn't get the wheel nut in to those guys there using the Ford pattern. There's the GM pattern we used on Mucus, and they're fine. So they were a bit painful. But while I am under here, I want to adjust the bands on this C4. It's pretty old, and this motor's testing its capability. So now the band adjustment nuts, if you can see just there, and one there at the rear. So all you do is back that nut there off, turn this guy into his snug, and then the rear one comes out 3 turns, and the front one comes out 1.5 to 1 3/4 turn. So it's impossible for me to show you under the car, but that's one band adjuster there, that's for the front band, and there's one back over this side for the rear band. So all we're doing is, that's your big nut there, it's a 3/4. So you crack your 3/4 nut, and then you take the little fella inside down snug, and just snug him down. Now that's just a little spanner. I think there's a certain inch pounds it's supposed to be, but any time I've done it, it's basically just felt nice and snug. Then mark your head. And I say mark your head because when he's under the transmission, you can't always get your spanner on and come perfectly half, perfectly 1 turn. So if you mark it, like that, doesn't matter how small the turns you make, you know when he comes back to 1. So there's 1 with the dot at the top again. There's 1.5 with him at the bottom. And then just bring your lock nut down. That's it. C4 front band adjustment. Rear band adjustment. And this one's 3 turns. Now here's a grey area. Really late model C4s have a fine thread on the front adjustment. Research exactly how many turns that is, because I don't know. So diff's in. Bands are adjusted. I will have to top that transmission fluid up because when I pulled the drive shaft I did lose a bit on the floor, so we'll check that as well. Cosmetics. I just want to match these wheels up, but I'm not taking them off mucus. If you remember in the mucus video I did say these are my favourite wheels. Well, I have a few sets of these. I have quite a number of sets of these. So we're just going to use these guys. I'm going to knock those studs out, I don't like them. We're just going to use these for front runners for this one. So like I said, don't forget to fill them up with oil. It's a rookie error. I've given that Ultra Blue about an hour to set up, so we'll fill him up. Loaded up, diff's done, transmission's checked, bands adjusted, checked all the fluids, oil as well, and she's loaded and strapped. And yeah, we are trailering it. We're taking the whole family, so I know it's a bit of fun to try and drive shit at the track and race it and then drive back, but not this time. We're taking the little ones and I grabbed a couple of tools, but we're not taking tomorrow too seriously. We'll just make a couple of runs, bit of fun. But I'll tell you one thing, when we get back from the drags, I know one thing that's going to get repaired, this trailer. It's done so much work for me. I think it's time for a birthday. It's pretty sad. I actually felt pretty bad putting the XY on it. So what do it run, you reckon? It does make decent power for a street motor. It's a bit heavier than the EH. The EH ran 770, however, it was blowing an intake gasket as it ran 770, so I think this one being a little bit heavier, but does make a little bit more top end. I'd be happy with that. 770 or better and I'm happy. We'll race against ourselves, not just beat the EH. Anyway, we'll see you in the morning. So, first run, we'll line up and give her. So she goes just fine, but I drove that with my right foot and not my brain, and that didn't work. So line up for a second run, and the plan is little burnout, get it off the line, then roll into it. second run was good, got off the line slow, rolled into it, all going well, and then uncovered another issue that you saw at the end of that run, and that was ever so slightly pushing transmission fluid out the dipstick tube, down the tube, onto the header.
We're pushing out a little bit of transmission fluid. You can see there a bit of smoke behind us, but anyway.
Now, there's two reasons if you're pushing out transmission fluid. Number one, it's over full, but generally if they're over full, they will froth the transmission fluid and you can tell straight away. Or number two, it's frying a transmission. Heating it up to the point where at the end of the run, it's that hot, it's starting to push it out. And I know which one I think it is, but we thought we'd cover all bases, crack the transmission line, drop a half a litre out or something like that, just in case it was over full and the dipstick was wrong, and go again.
So she's pumping a little bit of tranny fluid out that dipstick. We'll mop her up, clean underneath and go again. So we'll line up and have another one, but if it keeps smoking like that, I'll probably sack myself early so that I don't ruin everyone else's day by actually hosing the track down. At the minute it's just covering the header and that's the smoke, but I'd hate to be that guy that hoses the track down. So here we go.
For the third run, same plan again, but we take dipstick out, plug it full of rags, tape it off. It's got half a litre less fluid in it, so hopefully that'll be enough to contain it.
The EH is really the car we should be running here, but anyway, its motor will be back shortly, I guess. Bit of fun anyhow.
So third run, on and off the throttle to get off the line, then rolled into it, and it felt fine, but it actually ran slower, which just confirmed it is burning that box up. Which, if you go back to the start of the video, when I adjusted the bands, I kind of saw that one coming. So we'll chuck it on the trailer, spectate a couple of mates' cars, and then head on home.
Back home. I'll get her unloaded in the morning.
So that was that day at the drags with the XY, and as you can see, I'm no pro. Red lights, over revving it, shift light on forever, just distracted with the transmission and not watching. I think I saw 7500 at one stage. Somebody's got the bug. The minute my son got home, he jumped straight in his golf cart and he's down there in the puddles doing skids. So probably created a monster there, but that was a good day and all. Yeah, we may have burnt up a transmission. I was sort of hoping that it was over full and the dipstick was wrong, and that's why it was pushing fluid out. But when I was draining a bit of fluid, and that's the colour of it, you sort of know, yep, that ain't the case. She's slipping bands, but that was built over 20 years ago and handle 500 horsepower, and this thing's making well over 500 horsepower. So I decided to concede. I wouldn't say defeat, it was a lot of fun. We made 3 runs, but I decided to put it on the trailer while it was still running and we can salvage the box. And I'll build something bigger and better for that, just to hang on to that motor. But that thing is going to run pretty hard. It ran an 8.0 with a slipping transmission, and it was slipping bad. Rather than be that guy that destroys a tranny and hoses down the track, I'd just sort of better just keep a lid on it. Kind of did think that was coming, being the fact that that box is so old, and it did well to do what it did. The second-hand diff center clutches felt fine. It was taken 2, it was going relatively straight except for that first run. But anyway, big smile on my face. I hope you've enjoyed it, and thanks for watching. Oh, why is that so foggy? Because you've got grease on the lens, you idiot. Fuck me. Fuck me. And there's also one. How am I going to show you that one? There's the compressor. Who would have fucking thought? Take that, Joel bastard.